This is a film called The Neon Demon. It's very good, you should go watch it. Keep in mind though, it's pretty damn disturbing and has some gross parts in it. Anyway, there's an age certificate so you can make your own decisions. Oh, shit! My fucking mistake. Apparently you can't. The Neon Demon is the most graphic, appalling and sickening film ever shown in Britain. Quite frankly, if you support this film, then you deserve to burn in a hellfire with the power of 1,000 suns! Obviously I'm being sarcastic, but you know, when I read articles like Claire Folks' "Has cinema ever been so depraved and censors so immoral?" I start to wonder whether I've been caught in a time warp and have been thrust back into the 1980s. It's pretty incredible this guff is still published here in 2016 when a Serbian film has come and gone. Of course, when discussing what belongs in modern era, talking about articles from the Daily Mail is probably a moot point because it seems to live in its own bizarre time frame completely divorced from current reality. Which brings us to this gem of a think piece. Here, Claire posits that films have become too violent and censors too lenient. Let's take a dive in and see what she has to say. Booing, jeering and shouting at the screen. It was not the behaviour that's normally expected among the glitterati at Cannes. Okay, let me stop you right there. If you actually, seriously, unironically or sarcastically declare that booing a film isn't something you'd expect from the Cannes fucking Film Festival, then let me take you on a brief tour. This is a list of films that were booed at Cannes. Here is another list of films that were booed at Cannes. And another. And another. Here is an article from the very same publication you're currently on, reporting on a film getting booed at Cannes. I think I've made my point. But in a screening at the film festival last month, this was the reaction to a new film, The Neon Demon, which by all accounts is as gruesome and gory as they come. Extreme violence? Yes. Cannibalism? Yes. Lesbian necrophilia? Yes. My favourite part of that is the implication that the lesbian part of the lesbian necrophilia is important enough to put in there. Like somehow if it had been heterosexual necrophilia it would have been fine. Oh, you know, I was on board with the necrophilia until I found out it was a chick doing it to another dead chick and then I was just like, ew. One reviewer breathlessly describes how corpses look like love objects and beauty mingles with mangled flesh. Not surprisingly, several critics in the press screening walked out, appalled by the level of violence. You know, I was intrigued by where those quotes came from, so I looked it up and turns out they actually came from a positive review from Variety. See, it's very easy to cherry pick quotes and strip them of all context and nuance so it appears to support your argument. Also, by framing those two sentences apart from each other with a superfluous phrase about the soundtrack and poster in the middle, it fairly cleverly still makes you link them in your mind, despite the fact that critics' quotes it uses were taken from a positive review that fairly obviously did not walk out of the film, nor was outraged over its apparently depraved content. This begs the question, will the BBFC roll over as usual, allowing more depraved content to appear on our cinema screens? For the fact is that over the past 4 decades, the BBFC has grown increasingly lax in allowing films with extreme violence, approving scenes that are disturbing for young audiences. Now, this bit really baffles me, because the focus shifts suddenly from the Neon Demon, ostensibly what the article is talking about, to scenes that are disturbing for young audiences. She then goes on to talk about the controversy from 2008 when the BBFC rated The Dark Knight with a 12A, suitable for 12 and over, but kids younger can see it as long as they're accompanied by an adult. So are you saying that the Neon Demon shouldn't be allowed for young audiences? Because if so, we're in agreement there, but I don't think anyone was suggesting that that should be the case. I think everyone pretty firmly agrees that the Neon Demon is an adults-only film, and you're talking about whether or not this should be allowed at all. So why are you talking about The Dark Knight being rated too low? These are two completely separate issues. Any parents reared on the jolly old Cape Crusader may have innocently assumed it was suitable for a young child. Well, that's just down to your own fucking ignorance then, isn't it? Because Batman hasn't been suitable for kids for decades. If you're still judging Batman and Adam West, then yeah, you're probably gonna have a bad time, but when one of Batman's most celebrated storylines can have a pretty heavily implied rape scene, I think we've gone a bit beyond Holy Long John Silver Batman. She goes on to list a bunch of other examples that got a lot of complaints, like The Hunger Games, which I'd like to point out was actually rated 15 before being cut for theatrical release, The Lovely Blondes, The Woman in Black, and The War of the Worlds. Some of these I agree with, some of them I don't. But again, I don't see how any of this relates to the Neon Demon. You know we do have 18 ratings, right? And that kids aren't allowed to see or buy them, right? Well, maybe she's just trying to use them as examples of where the BBFC has failed before. Fine, alright, let's get back to the adults. And if the children have been failed woefully by the censors at the BBFC, what about adults? You know, normally people say that phrase the other way around, since kids legally can't make those decisions, adults can.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
She goes on to talk about the video nasties and films getting banned left and right in the 1980s. What I find funny about this is that the vast majority of people would look back at this as a pretty silly and shameful time, where the government stepped in to ban apparently shocking films based off nothing, sometimes only their titles. There was one Dolly Parton film, a fucking Dolly Parton film, The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, that was seized by police because of the title. None of them had even seen it, they just saw the title and figured, yep, that's gotta be porn. It's got the word horror in the title, never the fact that it stars fucking Dolly Parton and Burt Reynolds. And yet, despite that, Claire Fogue seems to look back at that time with reverence and nostalgia. Oh man, I wish we could go back to the good old days, where the nanny state told us we couldn't watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre because of its goddamn title, despite the fact that none of the violence is ever even seen on screen. Yeah, I fucking miss those days, where I, as an independent citizen who is of legal age, is told that certain content might warp my fragile little underdeveloped mind, and so must be banned from public consumption. But material which would have been considered beyond the pale, even for over 18s, is now passed with barely a snip of the censor's scissors. Some of the films afforded an 18 rating are frankly beyond the pale, sick and dehumanizing. Yep, really gotta miss the days of government censorship of a culture in Fear and Lies where I'm told that straw fucking dogs is too much for me to handle. Also great use of the same phrase 2 sentences in a row, just brilliant writing, round of applause, so proud of you. Here she talks about films that also should have been banned, like Gaspar Noé's Irreversible or Lars von Trier's Antichrist. She also calls the torture porn Gorno, which I think is hilarious because no one has ever fucking called it that. Perhaps worst of all is the Human Centipede series. It is difficult to convey the film's full depravity, but basically they show a demented scientist who kidnaps people and stitches them together to create the centipede of the title. The characters are tortured without mercy, the human body brutalized in a depraved way. The filmmaker has boasted of the effect of his vile work, proudly declaring that he saw people vomiting, people left the movie theatre because they couldn't handle it. Cynically, his publicity material was splashed with the question, is this the sickest film ever made? Now, I haven't seen the Human Centipede, so unlike Claire Fogue, I'm not going to comment on the artistic merit of films I haven't seen, but yes, the Human Centipede films, especially the second one, are indeed sickening. They depict some of those gruesome images you could capture on film. And guess what? The BBFC agree with you! You want to talk about the censors snipping their scissors? Well, I'm sure glad you brought it up because the Human Centipede 2 was rejected. It was flat out refused classification. It was only after 2.5 minutes, which when you're only cutting single shots is a shit ton of time, had been cut out that it was even allowed for public release. I don't actually agree with that practice. I think that art is art and should be allowed in its full and unaltered form, whether it offends or shocks or disgusts people or not. Adults should choose for themselves, it isn't the government's place to tell us what we can watch. In fact, Claire helpfully brings this point up. Libertarians will argue that adults should be allowed to watch whatever they want. Indeed, the BBFC argues that, in line with the Human Rights Act, they will not normally override the principle that adults should be free to choose their own entertainment. But there are laws that govern what people can watch. Images of paedophilia, for instance, are illegal, for fear that they may corrupt, harm, or inspire those watching. So why are there not fears about torture, extreme violence, and brutal rape inspiring inadequate viewers to emulate such depravity? What? You're seriously coming out here and comparing the likes of the Neon Demon and Irreversible to fucking child porn? What? Are you insane? Fuck you! To take art that people have worked at and put months and years of blood, sweat and tears into creating, into expressing themselves as is their free speech fucking rights, and more importantly, unlike illegal images, is fucking fake! You come in here and dismiss it all as no better than child pornography? That is not only massively insulting to the artists themselves, but insulting to the medium itself. This isn't just a person who hasn't seen the Neon Demon complaining about the Neon Demon. This is a person advocating government intervention and censorship of art. This writer has the fucking nerve to call films like the Neon Demon corrosive to society when she's writing for the fucking Daily Mail, a paper that continually, day to fucking day, publishes hateful, bigoted nonsense and lies to feed to people that breeds anger and contempt and hate. That shit is corrosive, that shit is harmful. And you might be saying, well, what's the difference between you and her? She's calling what you like worthless and awful, and you're doing the same back to her. How are you any different? Well, I'm not saying it should be banned. I'm not saying that the Daily Mail shouldn't exist, or that people aren't at liberty to read it. However, I can criticise, just like Claire Foes can criticise the Neon Demon. Keep in mind, next time you're furiously typing away, making your conclusion to an article a series of rhetorical questions and one flimsy reason as to why you don't hate all violence, by saying that 12 Years a Slave was good, essentially saying that violence is fine when it's in a real-life historical context, but not in a metaphorical or artistic context, maybe look in a mirror, or at who is publishing your hateful fucking drivel.